Hello and welcome to the History of Modern Greece. I'm your host, Daniel Roberts, and I'm here with my father, George, and our theme music is brought to you by Mark Youngerman. This is a podcast that covers the events from the fall of ancient Greece to the modern day. This is episode 1, the Proto Indo Europeans and the Bronze Age. Greece is a modern country today. It's a European nation that you can easily find on any globe. Its capital city is Athens. But did you know the nation of Greece is really young? In fact, it was founded in the year 1832. Now, that's only 11 years after the death of Napoleon. So what were they before 1832? Well, just like many other countries in the world, they belonged to an empire. And not just any empire, the Ottoman Empire. And now the Ottoman Empire, or rather the Turks, occupied and controlled the Greek land and its people. In 1821, Greek freedom fighters declared independence from the Ottoman Empire, and for 11 years they fought in the Greek War of Independence before Turkey finally agreed to let the Greek provinces go. Now, to really tell the story of modern Greece, we must give you some background information. Otherwise, you're not going to know the significance of the players involved in this story. For example, we're going to tell you who the Ottoman Empire was and where they came from. And why is it that Athens is the capital city of Greece and not Corinth, Thebes, or Istanbul? But we have to start the narrative a long time ago. And I'm not referring to ancient Greece or even the Bronze Age Greeks who sacked the city of Troy. Instead, we have to go back much further. In 4500 BC, or rather 6,500 years ago, there was a tribe of nomads who lived on the edge of the Eurasian steppe, and it is from this tribe that the story of the Greeks began. And this period is also known to historians as the Copper Age. What is the Eurasian steppe, you might ask? Well, the Eurasian steppe is kind of like the North American prairies. It is a flat stretch of grassland that runs across the northern part of Europe and Asia. Now, during the Ice Age, which was only a few thousand years before the beginning of our story, the northern part of this land would have been covered in ice, from Mongolia in the east to the Ukraine in the west. These grasslands were home to herd animals, such as deer and horses and even buffalo. Now, our story starts 6,000 years ago, but 6,000 years before our story begins, this place was also home to herds of woolly mammoths. It was a wide, open expanse of grass. Now, the Eurasian steppe was the perfect place for herd animals. There was grass and shrubs as far as the eye could see. And if you could live off grass, then this was an ocean of food. However, the climate was unbelievably harsh. In the winter, it dropped to sub-zero temperatures, with the wind chills bringing it down to negative 40 degrees. Summer droughts could see the grass drying right up, forcing great migrations from one side of the steppe to the other. For humans, the Eurasian steppe was a desolate wasteland, kind of like an ocean. The ocean is full of water and food, but it is not habitable. Water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. This was the Eurasian steppe for early modern humans. People couldn't eat grass, still can't actually, but they could eat the animals living on the grasslands. And this is where the story of the Greeks begin. Now, to be honest, there was no such thing as a Greek person yet. But neither were there Germans or Latins or Persians or Bulgarians. But their ancestors were around. In fact, the ancestors of all these diverse people were one tribe. And this group of people were called Proto Indo Europeans, or PI for short. Now, how do we know the PI people really existed? We don't have archaeological evidence, at least not really. There's no written record, yet we claim to know a lot about these people. The truth is, the PI people were theorized about in the 19th century, Linguists were noticing similarities within the Germanic and foreign languages. Words sounded the same for some reason. And if you want a good example of this, go to Google Translate and type mother. Mother is an old word, a word every language has a word for. This word is similar in English as it is in Latin, as it is in Greek, as it is in Bulgarian, as it is in Iranian, as it is in Hindi. Linguists look at this connection, and they came to the conclusion that at one point, all of these ancient civilizations must have descended from the same people. And it must have happened thousands of years ago. Now, this theory was brought forth in the 19th century, and thanks to DNA, this hypothesis has been proven correct. Pi is the most comprehensible language ever to be reconstructed in the modern era. This isn't to say Pi is the only reconstructed language, but the amount of work that has gone into this project allows us to say with confidence what specific words they used, and because of this basic understanding of their language, we have a basic understanding of their culture.
So who were the Proto-Indo-Europeans? We know the Proto-Indo-Europeans lived in the western portion of the Eurasian steppe, somewhere around modern-day Ukraine. We also know that these people were herders and had domesticated animals living with them. They had sheep, and although they were probably used for food at first, their wool became ideal for mending clothing, and eventually they were bred for better and better wool. The Proto-Indo-Europeans were the first people to domesticate the horse. Again, just like the sheep. This animal was probably raised for food at first, but as soon as they found out they could ride on the backs of these beasts, it transformed the community. Suddenly people could ride out into the vastness of the steppe and ride for miles and miles in any direction. Now the society that was Pi had an advantage over everyone else around them. Their sheep allowed them to make clothing to survive the harsh winters of the northern steppe. Their horses allowed them to travel further and to hunt animals farther away from their home. This led to a population increase. Most things we know about the Pi people are from their words. They had words for drive, wagon, horse, and yoke. These words prove that life for the Proto-Indo-European revolved around the horse and riding. They used it for transportation, hauling their supplies and belongings. They used them for hunting, and they used them for war. Which brings us to the fact that we know they were a warlike people. They had words for war, struggle, power, troops, sword, and prevail. They had words for hunting, prisoner, brew, beer, and guest. So it is not impossible to suggest that sometimes these men would come back from hunting, drink beer, and fight each other or their prisoners. But we can also tell they weren't just brutes. The fact that they had a word for a prisoner proves they didn't kill everyone in battle. They also had a word for wine, so we know they would prepare food and alcohol for their guests.
We can tell from their words that they had a religion, a sort of Proto-Indo-European religion. Scientists have done a good job reconstructing the religion of the Proto-Indo-Europeans. And in the beginning, there was the sky god, or Pater Deus, or Sky Father. The Sky Father was an all-knowing god who saw over everything. He was separate from the sun, and was in control of the lesser gods, as well as the world itself. Now the other gods might live in heaven, or the heavens, but Deus was the only god of heaven. Deus was the Heavenly Father. With the Heavenly Father, the Pi people also worshipped the Mother Earth. Together, the Sky Father and Earth Mother were the parents of all the lesser gods. After the Sky Father, there were the Divine Twins. The Divine Twins are so important to Pi religion that their story is told throughout every creation myth in Indo-European culture. These twins are always associated with horses and pop up everywhere in ancient myths. In Latin mythology, they are the twins of Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome. In Greek mythology, they are the sons of Zeus, Castor, and Pollux. In Hindu religion, the twins are known as the Asvani, and are never referred to by their individual names, but only as the divine twins who ride on a chariot pulled by horses that never grow tired. They are also said to accompany the dawn in the early morning. These twins also show up in the Baltic religions as the heavenly twins, and unfortunately it has not been possible to reconstruct their name, but they are known as the heavenly twins who accompany the dawn by pulling the sun across the sky on two chariots. Now these twins are in every Pi religion, and in some instances they seem to be associated with the morning stars. And morning stars are usually referring to Mercury and Venus. They orbit very close to the sun, so they're only visible at the dawn. We also know they were a patriarchal society. They had words for king and master of the house, as well as wedding, bride, and daughter-in-law. A father would wed his daughter to another man's family, probably in exchange for something of value, like sheep or horses. This patriarchal system is very similar to what we have now, where the father of the bride will walk his daughter down the aisle and hand her off to the groom, where she gets married and changes her last name from her father's family name to her husband's family name.
With so many new Pi people being born, it was time for them to spread out and find new settlements. This is what triggered the first great migration of the Proto-Indo-Europeans. It is important to understand these people weren't sent off like colonists. They were just moving further out with every new generation, trying to build their homes just a little further out than their families. And as centuries went on, they grew further and further apart. This is how the language evolved differently with every direction the Pi people traveled. The once unified Proto-Indo-European tribe broke up, some staying where they were, others taking to the plains and riding east, settling along Central Asia, and others traveling further east into modern-day China. Some of these people became the ancestors of the Persians and Hittites. Some of these people traveled west until they came across the Carpathian Mountains. At the Carpathian Mountains, the mountains that separate Ukraine from Hungary, the settlers were hit with a physical barrier. When it came time for the next generation to move out of the village and go find a nice place to set up their families, there were only two ways to go. If the tribes wanted to migrate west, they were going to have to go above or below the mountain chain. Those who went northwest evolved into the modern-day Baltic and Germanic tribes, while the ones who went southwest would eventually evolve into the Latins. There were some Proto-Indo-Europeans who decided to travel south, and this branch of the Pi would eventually evolve into the Greeks. This initial breakup of the Pi tribe led to the foundation of several major cultures and language groups. The branches are listed as follows. 1. The Anatolian branch. This includes Hittite with a written language, now extinct. 2. Tocharian branch. Northwest China with a written language, now extinct. 3. Italo-Celtic branch. These are the Latin, Roman, Irish, Scottish, Welsh, and Gallics. 4. The Armenian branch. This is an isolated group. 5. The Albanian branch, another isolated group. 6. The Hellenic branch. This is the Greek. 7. Germanic branch, making up Old English, Norse, Dutch, High German, and Low German. 8. Balto-Slavic, making up Lithuania, Latvian, Estonian, and Russian and Ukrainian and Serbian. 9. Indo-Iranian. This is the Persian and the languages of India, Punjabi, Hindi, Bengali. Of all these branches in the family tree of Indo-Europeans, we are going to follow the Hellenic branch.
Around 3000 BCE, or 5,000 years ago, the Hellenic branch of Pi slowly migrated south from the original tribal lands. Now this brought them to the top of the Black Sea in modern-day Ukraine, and very slowly they migrated south into modern-day Romania and Bulgaria, where they eventually settled in the northern region of the Balkan Peninsula. As these tribes moved south, they intermarried with local populations. Meanwhile, to the southeast, in the Fertile Crescent, which is the Middle East, civilizations like the Sumerians were thriving and experimenting with metals when they discovered a very valuable compound, either by accident or on purpose. A smelter was liquefying copper when he added tin to the mixture, and what came out was a metal harder and tougher than both the tin and the copper that went in. This metal was bronze, and its discovery gave rise to the Bronze Age. Now, bronze was used for many things, from weapons and armor to tools and plows. Bronze could be used to make spokes for wheels, so now your cart could go over that rough terrain without breaking. Statues were made out of bronze, and so were pieces of jewelry and cutlery and drinking goblets. Bronze was the gold standard of a civilization's wealth, and soon everyone was trading with it. However, bronze was not a natural state. Copper and tin were different metals. They were found in different places. Copper was everywhere. You couldn't go on a hike without stumbling across copper ore. But tin was more rare. Tin was the valuable metal that was needed to produce this new compound. Trading routes were established across the regions, and soon places as far away as Britain and China were entering the Bronze Age. This period brought immense wealth to certain nations. Anyone who controlled trading vessels would just rake in the gold. There was more wealth and luxurious goods in this period than almost any other time before or since. Minus the modern era, of course. Giant temples were constructed with beautiful gardens, while kings and lords wore gold and drank wine and sat on immense piles of wealth.
In 2500 BC, or the mid-3rd millennium BC, wealthy kingdoms started popping up all over the region. Their wealth and power was built on international trade. And soon places like Egypt would trade grain to nations that solely exported metals, growing the populations of these kingdoms to levels unsustainable without the trade network. The wealthiest of these kingdoms were the ancient Egyptians to the south, and in the Middle East, a man named Sargon united the Sumerians and Akkadians into an Akkadian empire. The Akkadian Empire covered the entire Fertile Crescent, from modern-day Kuwait to Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. Sargon of Akkad designed his empire to thrive off the bronze trade network, which meant the city needed a complex set of rules, laws, and economics in order to function properly. Cities in the north were dedicated to mining only, which meant they didn't have time to grow their food or even protect their homes. But it was okay because a city down the river was dedicated solely to growing wheat and food. This was the first real empire, and it went very well, making people very rich. All this time, the Hellenic branch of the Proto Indo Europeans continued their migration south until they made it to Thrace and Thessaly, or northern Greece. As they made it closer to the Mediterranean, the Hellenes started to encounter these Bronze Age empires. And the first one they came up against was the Minoan civilization.
The Minoans were an ancient culture that migrated out of Anatolia and sailed across the Aegean Sea to the island of Crete around 7,000 years ago. In case you didn't know already, Crete is a long island at the bottom of Greece that stretches across the Aegean Sea towards Anatolia, or modern-day Turkey. The Minoans started as farmers and small settlements. But over the centuries, their population grew larger, and eventually cities started to pop up. 4 of the ancient Minoan cities grew into mega-cities with large community temples and marketplaces and storage houses. These cities were rich with food and wine and luxurious items, and their artwork and pottery skills were some of the most beautiful in the world. The four major cities of Crete were Phaistos, Knossos, Mallia, and Zakros. These cities were sprawling with 3 to 4 level temples, with markets and public arenas. The Minoan civilization also worshipped the bull, or aurochs. There are paintings and frescoes and sculptures of bulls everywhere. The murals that survive today show pictures of Minoan men leaping over the head of a bull. It looks like they had a version of bullfighting back then, but instead of killing the bull with a sword, they leapt over its head and landed on the other side. It is obvious that these people worshipped or idolized the bull just based on their artwork and pottery alone. And although they were big into the bull, they also had an appreciation for everything related to the sea and nature. There are many frescoes of dolphins jumping out of the water. The Minoan civilization was actually discovered by an archaeologist named Arthur Evans in the 19th century. Arthur was in Athens at a market when he saw these tiny little stone carvings. They were being used as necklaces and earrings, and Arthur Evans found them to be very intriguing, not just because they were beautiful and peculiar little things, but also because they were very old and covered in writing that he couldn't identify. The writing looked like hieroglyphs. He asked the people in the market where they were getting these tiny tokens, and they said they came from the ruins on the island of Crete, in a mostly forgotten part of the island. Arthur Evans set sail from Athens to Crete, and went exploring in the hills outside of the city of Heracleion. When he discovered these ancient ruins and realized he was looking at a civilization over 4,000 years old, he knew he was sitting on something important. He named this civilization the Minoans in recognition of the Greek myths about King Midas and the Minotaur.
The Minoans weren't just an ancient empire from the Bronze Age that made its wealth and power from trading in ore, although they did do this. They were isolated on an island from the rest of the empires, but also situated directly in the center of the trading routes. Based on the artwork, it is also likely that the Minoan civilization held their women in very high regards, and were most likely working in the administrative duties of the markets and civil duties, as the men were mostly at sea. They were seafaring people and had an extensive navy, but they didn't have any walls surrounding their cities, either because they were relatively peaceful people or because they were isolated from the mainland's army, or maybe because their navy would sink any ship that got too close. The Minoan people did not need to build walls around their cities to protect themselves and their livelihood. This is an outstanding fact because we know the Minoans were very rich and had many resources to take. But this isn't that far out of touch because the pottery created by these people did not have any images of war or violence painted on them. Their artwork was rather peaceful. The Minoans also had a written language, and with clay tablets scattered throughout the ruins, there was no shortage of writing examples for Arthur Evans. But the writing was very complex. They were not letters or characters, but instead were small images or hieroglyphs. This writing has been labeled as Linear A, and to this day the text has not been translated. There are endless amounts of history waiting to be told from these tablets, but for now we will have to wait. Around the year 1700 BC, the Minoan city of Knossos became the dominant mega-city on Crete, and eventually became the capital of the entire empire, hence the Palace of Knossos. The Minoans were now a powerhouse in the Aegean, and they were ruled by a single king. Unlike the cultures on the mainland, this dominance most likely happened peacefully, either from economics or political arrangements. Because of the success of the Minoan people, there was a population boom, and suddenly there wasn't enough room for everyone, and several colonies were set up on the Greek islands in the Aegean, next to mainland Greece as well as Anatolia. According to the Greenland temperature chart, this period is referred to as the Minoan warming period. It is an unusually warm period in human history and is attributed to the better crop yields and growth of civilization. One of these Minoan colonies was on an island to the north. It was central to the sea and trading ports, but also it was far away from the mainland on all sides and acted as a perfect physical barrier from an attack. This island was called Thera, and it was made up of a large ring from a volcano that exploded many thousands of years before. The paintings in Knossos suggest this colony was on modern-day Santorini, which is basically a giant volcano protruding through the ocean.
Well, that's it for today. Join us next time on the history of modern Greece. Stay safe and stay awesome.